Hello and welcome to The Ripple Impact, the podcast where we dive into those fascinating, unexpected ripples that change everything. Today's guest is someone I've worked with and admired for years, Annie Auerbach, co-founder of Starling Strategy, author of Flex, cultural thinker and all-round brilliance generator. Annie is one of those rare people who can take complex cultural tensions and make them feel utterly clear, deeply human and full of possibilities. From building a whole new way of thinking about insights to shaping the future of flexible working, her career is a masterclass in the power of asking brilliant questions and listening to what's under the surface. Her and business partners Adam's clients range from Nike to Dove to M&S to Diageo and beyond. Annie, welcome to the show. I'm absolutely thrilled to have you here with us today.
Oh, thank you so much, Laura. That's such a kind intro. I really appreciate it.
Well, it's all you. It's all you. You're most welcome. I had the absolute pleasure of working with you. Gosh, I worked it out. It was 12 years ago when you and I and Adam worked together on Diet Coke in my Coca-Cola days, which I'm sure we'll get into at some point. But actually, I'd love to wind right back to the beginning and hear about your journey and the ripple impact moments that shaped your career. So can we start right at the beginning? There was a real shift for you from insights to culture. Can you take us back to those early days and those moments and what brought you to where you are today?
I actually started as a journalist and an editor. I used to write lifestyle pieces, and they actually had quite a lot in common with the discipline of understanding culture, in the sense that you had to spot what are the upcoming themes and ideas that are going to capture people's imaginations. How can you articulate that in a way that feels really compelling but feels fresh at the same time? I transitioned out of journalism and went to work for a business called Flamingo, which is where we met. Flamingo was famous for global qualitative research, and the dominant form of that was speaking to people in discussion groups, ethnographies, etc. And quite quickly, Adam and I, who worked together at Flamingo, created a specialism that we called cultural intelligence. And that wing of the business was very specific in the sense that we didn't speak to consumers. Our analysis came from looking at culture, looking at data, reports, speaking to experts across disciplines, understanding what might be the deeper shifts at play, which with the best will in the world, it's hard for consumers in a group to articulate because it requires a stepping back and an almost bird's eye view of what's going on and the interconnections of what's going on. And so we set that up together, and it was like an intrapreneurship rather than an entrepreneurship, because we were innovating within a company and within a structure, and we had the support of our leaders within that. But then we got or at least I think initially got very hungry to set up our own business, because I realized I'd found a fantastic collaborator. I realized the power of cultural insights and how it was quite a zag in an industry that was zigging. And it felt like really to let this thrive, grow wings, Starling, it would require us to really think about what does this look like if it was a standalone business, and how could we produce something quite unique. So that's the broad journey that I went on.
And tell us the analogy of the starlings, because I remember when you first told me the story, I was like, oh, that's fantastic. And it's a lovely way to talk about culture and movement. Can you tell us the starling story and why that's part of your business name?
So, well, for a start, on a very basic level, they're so beautiful. I don't know whether you've seen starling murmurations ever. I used to live in Brighton, and over the pier, you'll see at dusk these amazing, they look choreographed movements of a flock of starlings all moving as one. And there's a kind of poetry to it. You can't help but look at it and feel slightly awe-inspired. But it also is a fantastic metaphor, we think, for how culture works, in the sense that, for a start, starlings represent lots of little pieces of insight or data or tensions or emergent needs. And what you can do is the art of bringing those together into one powerful story that a brand can do something with. But also, if you think about actually how a starling murmuration works, it is the starlings at the edge who are responding to either opportunity or threat. So there might be a predator on the horizon, and hence they push the whole flock to move in one direction. Or indeed there might be food or somewhere safe to land, so they move in this direction. And that's in a way how culture works, you have people at the edges, or the forces at the edges, which are reacting to potential opportunities and threats in our daily lives, what matters to us, what we care about. And that actually creates a ripple effect. And the Starling murmuration is a really good example of those outliers at the edge creating a ripple effect in order to create movements.
Oh, fantastic. It's such a beautiful metaphor. And hearing it for a second time, it still is beautiful. It's interesting, isn't it? Because you talk about the ones on the edges are ones that actually create the change. I feel like you're one of those people. Like, you always feel like you're one of the ones on the edges. You're spotting things that other people maybe aren't, and you always feel like you're one step ahead. So I've always felt that from you. So it's the perfect metaphor for you and for the business more broadly. Can you explain to us what is cultural insights and how that differs to regular insights? You talked about the moment with Flamingo where you found this real opportunity in niche and space, but a lot of brands and businesses don't use it at all, and arguably don't use it enough. Can you explain why you think it's so important? Because I know why, and I've been one of those very lucky people who's been on the receiving end of your work, and we've partnered together. But how would you describe it if you were going in cold with a client and they'd never experienced cultural insights before?
Well, I think a lot of the insight world is focused on understanding what's inside people's heads. Often you'll hear the phrase, what makes people tick? And what our focus is to look at the systems and the forces and the shifts that are happening in the in-between spaces that are actually moving all of us. So often we describe it as the why behind some of these human behaviors, the stuff that's underneath the surface, which you're less able to pull it into mind and say, well, this is why I feel the way I do. And it comes from the unique collision of lots of different disciplines and expertise. For example, the typical experts we might speak to, if we're looking at, for example, a project around the future of the family, we might try and understand the economics and the conditions that young families are facing these days. We might look at family therapists and try and understand the psychological difficulties. We might look at demography and understand how the structure of the family is changing. And it is through the collision of all these different areas that you come up with the spark. The spark in terms of culture is really understanding something that feels fresh and like a revelation, but also feels extremely relevant. So revelatory whilst also being relevant to you, not something which feels entirely fresh and new and you can't relate to it whatsoever, but something that instinctively you feel is right, but you maybe haven't understood why those conditions are so key at the moment. Often in terms of the way that Adam and I work is we're both historians. So we both studied history at university, and we will look at things in terms of trajectories. We did a fantastic project understanding the cultural meaning of joy and happiness. And to start that project, often the best way to think about it is look back and go, how historically have we understand these concepts? And then what are the precise cultural conditions that we're going through today, which have barriers to us receiving that joy and happiness in our lives, and looking forwards, what might be more emergent definitions or articulations of what that could look like. So therefore the brand, if they're trying to do something useful in this space, can understand these very contemporary, deeply human articulations of what this meaning is. So they can feel they're on the front foot, but they're also future-proofed because they'll understand a sense of trajectory, where we have been, where we are, and where we're going to.
I think that's so beautiful as well, because for me, the best insights is always observational. And I think actually what you guys do is the bit before the behavior. It almost feels like the reason why something is happening, or the reason why something's coming, or the reasons why people are going to behave as they are, not just observing them in the here and now, but understanding that thread throughout history. As you said, bringing in anthropologists to understand where have we been, and therefore how is that changing the trajectory of where people are going. It is deeply fascinating. And when we first worked together, when I was at Coca-Cola, and we worked on the Diet Coke project, and I won't give too many of the insights away, but unsurprisingly, our project was around women and the role of women in society. And I remember co-creating question with you, because you know there's something more powerful that you want to go after. You know the space, but you don't know the question to ask to get you something really powerful. And that's where the best work that we've done is where we're collaborating at the beginning to say, what's the actual fundamental question here for our target and for our consumers? Let's not just assume what's going on, but let's try and understand what's happening in the surface. So it was one of my absolute favorite projects, and it stays with me forever. That project was incredible.
I was just going to say, at the time, I think we were right at the beginning, and it was quite an experimental method that we were coming to you with. And you were really brave enough to go, yes, I like the sound of this. But you're absolutely right, because often with this work, you are looking at the brief behind the brief. And so there'll be quite a rational brief on the surface, which will be, we need to grow in this market, or we're losing out to this competitor, or whatever it is. And that's why those conversations at the beginning and those collaborations, as you put it, are so powerful, because you're listening to one another and you're getting on the same page and you're understanding what are the bigger questions that are circling in the business, which you don't quite know how to answer right now. Often there's language being used within the organization, which is incredibly revealing to particular thought patterns or models and the way they think about something. So the way they think about women or feminism or whatever it happened to be. And you can see almost little chinks of light. There's something that we can prod on here, or there's something that we can do which feels new or will help people see things in a different way. And often you've got fantastic research that you've done over the years that you're sitting on, but it's kind of taking you to the same place.
Yeah.
And what you need is a leap forwards or a breakthrough or a different perspective. And I feel that's where we can hopefully bring something new. And the way that we were discussing it at the beginning, that's exactly what happened. Those chinks of lights happened, and you were so powerfully aware of what was needed, and it wasn't necessarily the rational thing.
Yeah, and it was honestly one of the most incredible pieces of work I've been part of, have witnessed, have led in my career. Like, I'm so proud of that work. There was a few moments that I will share with you, and I don't know if you know these stories, but I also want to talk about what happened afterwards, because this is a lesson in what not to do. And candidly, it was my most beautiful work, but also I think it's my biggest failure, because the work was so powerful, and what we did with you at Starling was so deeply rooted in genuine core human beliefs and needs, and the emotion in it was just so tangible, to the point where when we got the creative response back from the agency, so for the advertising agency, it was myself and the marketing director at the time in the room, and we both cried, because it was so beautiful and it was so powerful, and it touched us because we were women. We felt the insight. We felt it really deeply. We could empathize with the consumers on a level that we never had before. And the response that came back from the agency, I mean, honestly, I'm not even joking. It gives me goosebumps now thinking about it. Gosh, I wish I still had that video. Not that you can take these things with you, but the video that they put together was so powerful. And I felt like it was one of those things that could talk to you if you were 20 or 40 or 50 or 90. Like, as a woman, it felt the most insightful piece of work I'd ever seen. And we got it to such a beautiful place. And I remember we went to one of the bottling conferences, and one of the commercial leads actually came up to me afterwards and said, it's one of the most beautiful pieces of insights I've ever seen. And I was just so proud of the work we did. But the reason I'm telling this story is because the really sad thing is that didn't get to consumers. I think we were too ahead of our time. This was 12 years ago, where culture wasn't really a thing that was being talked about prolifically within the industry. And I don't think the power of it was really understood. And I think what we felt in our core team with you, with the agency, with the marketing teams, it was felt really deeply. But, I'll say, like, we weren't brave enough to get the executive teams to feel it. We took the work to them and they didn't feel it the way we felt it. And that's our fault. I don't think it's that we weren't brave, because we were, but there was something that missed in that, taking the people on the journey to get them to feel what we were feeling. In that moment where we were crying in that creative response, we needed everyone else to feel that, because in an organization, you have such a big system to influence. And it's one of my biggest regrets in my career is that work never got to consumers. And I'm so sad for that, because the work that you guys did was incredible. But I've taken you to every company since, because the power of what you do is amazing.
Well, that thank you so much. And we felt the same way. I mean, it set us on our journey too. I feel like we were trying out something quite fresh. It was right at the beginning of the way we were thinking about culture. And we were so lucky to find you and a team that was so ready for a different way of looking at things. And I think that story is quite powerful in a way, even though, as you shared, you feel a bit disappointed about how things ended up, because the notion, back to your current work and the ripple impact, the notion of a ripple, you have to disrupt something at the beginning in order for the thing to happen. So whether that be the pebble into the water or an entirely fresh way of doing things in an organization that's used to doing things one way. And at what point does the ripple meet the edge and kind of stop?
Yeah.
Or does it continue? And I think a lot of it's timing. You learn from these things. And now we have a process which is incredibly collaborative all the way along the journey. And so we seed ideas pretty early. We get lots of feedback. I'm sure we were doing that anyway, but it was much more of a to and fro, a kind of improvisation of idea creation. From what you've described, that might have been difficult in winning in leadership along the way. But that's always going to be the case when you're doing something fresh and you're doing something new, is it's disrupted by its very nature. And is the culture ready for it? Is there an appetite for it? It sounded like what you described really beautifully is it was a contagious thought. It went from you to the agency, and what you described at the bottling conference as well. It feels like there was something instinctive and contagious about this. But yeah, I guess it's a learning from
It
the future.
is. It is. And they always say you learn the most from your mistakes, right? Not from where you did really well. And it's about taking people on the journey. And as you said, making it contagious to other people, not just holding that within your core team, but making everyone feel that. And we learned that the hard way, but gosh, did we not make that mistake again? So luckily, as those projects have evolved and the different places that we've worked together, getting people to understand the power of culture and what it can unlock. And I think you have to do that first because people get scared when it's something new. And as you said, the lovely metaphor of the starling, if you're on the edge of a murmuration of starling, you still have to have the trust of others to know that if you move, I'm going to move as well. So there's a whole system that has to be trusted and in sync with each other for change to happen, especially when it's something so fundamental. It was a big life lesson and a big career lesson for me, but one of the most beautiful. It was a ripple impact moment for me, for sure.
Yeah, and likewise at our end, it gave us the inspiration to think this can happen, this can work. And it's not just an outlier thing, it's something that can have genuine impact. And yeah, it started us on our journey too. So that's so cool that we both had that at the same time.
Yeah, a ripple impact for each other, which is lovely.
Exactly.
And hence why we've worked together for such a long time. I know I've said this to you before, this was a while back, but genuinely, when we're in the room together, the inspiration and the challenge and the provocation and working with you guys has always been some of the most inspiring work that I've ever done. You have a way of taking something that is so complex, going all the way back through history and anthropological learning and taking that into what's happening today and what we think will happen. That is a serious art. You have a way of turning the complex into something seriously empowering and inspiring. So it's always been incredible to work with you.
That's really nice to hear, but it's also something that I take quite seriously because I really don't like it when people wear their learning heavily. I really love people who wear their learning lightly. Like when we're in conversations with you, for example, it's very important that we are able to communicate what we think is the big idea in a way that will land with you and the organization and all the challenges that you're facing as a business at that time. And what was really cool about the fact that we had so many touch points along the way and you're so receptive to that as well, because I know what clients' diaries are like. Incredibly, we've had another conversation where you told me about barcode days where meetings are back to back to back to back. And we know it's a privilege to be able to have that slither in a day where we can present our ideas and go, we really believe in this. What do you think? But I think what is really important and what you always did, luckily for us, is brought the challenge to the table and say, that's not quite right. Or you've got to push it further because you're not being brave enough. Or instinctively, this word for me, that feels really powerful, but tell me why. Whatever it happened to be, it was a sense of challenge, which we totally relished because I honestly think back to the disruptive ripple thing. If you don't have a sense of challenge, you're going to have a flat pond. If you don't have a sense of not really conflict, but it's the to and fro and the spice of getting to a good place and trusting that any dialogue dialogue that you're having is actually getting you to a good place. It's not about dismantling, it's about building.
And that's the beauty of a great collaborative partnership, like you said, working together to get an incredible question, because rubbish in, rubbish out of anything. Rubbish question, rubbish answer. And so getting to really powerful, deep, interesting questions, not what's happening in my category. You probably know that. Getting to deep, personal human questions, collaborative, is amazing. You guys bring an incredible stimulus to us, and being able to stress that and pressure test that and seeing how far you can take that. Great insight people and great marketeers know when they go, it's that. And you can bring, here are the 10 provocations, here are the 10 tensions, and this is how we're seeing them play out, and this is what we're seeing in culture, and this is what we're hearing. And as a brand owner, you know instinctively number 2, number 4, and number 7 are the really, really interesting spaces, because. And I think that comes from such a deep understanding of your brand and your category and your challenge, but also your organization, right? What's going to really stick and what's going to land and what's going to really light people up? Because yes, you've got a consumer to talk to, or a shopper or a customer, but first you've got to talk internally.
Yeah.
Because that sometimes the biggest challenge is getting it to consumers, getting through that internal bureaucracy and hierarchy and sign-offs and budget and resource, etc. Brilliant brand owners know instinctively, I truly believe, know instinctively the spaces that are exciting, and the spaces, you've called it relatable but revolutionary for that brand, that moment and that challenge. And that comes through great collaboration, us trusting you challenging us, going deep, going, what about that? Hang on a minute, we've missed, could we just, how about those great conversations in a partnership? And that's what we've always done.
Totally. So 2 things come up from what you just said. One is, I've always thought about the dynamic as, and Adam and I often write our approaches in this dynamic of inside out and outside in. And we can be the experts of outside in, but we're never going to be the experts of inside out, because you live and breathe and you are party to a million different conversations that are happening, which we will never be able to access. We can listen and understand, and whatever you've told us about this project, we can absorb that, but you will have synapses connecting as you're listening. So that's one thing. And the second thing is, I don't know whether this is a thing that I've been brought up with or whether it's a more gendered thing. I don't know. But I think there's something about hyper awareness of people's reactions to stuff and a scrutiny of people's reactions to stuff. And it's a little bit harder over Zoom, but it's not if you're talking in, because you can tell when someone's just
When they're like,
leaning forward slightly, exactly, or if they're like, and you
not
can.
quite sure.
Exactly. Or if they feel uncomfortable, and that might be a good thing, because if it's entirely predictable, then why are you paying us? So that awareness is an important skill to bring to a project. So you can do it to your detriment, I think, as a woman, which is to be hyper aware of every reaction if it closes you down. But if it actually is about spotting the moments of synchronicity, the moments of opportunity, then I think it's super helpful. I don't know how you train for it, but it comes with experience, it comes with conversations, it comes with confidently having a point of view, but also confidently listening to a point of view.
Yeah, I was going to say, when you said, like, how do you train that? I was like, ooh, good question. I was like, well, I think it starts with deep listening, not just listening to prove a point or listening to find the nugget that answers the idea you already have. Like, I mean, what's the point in doing that? I see that all the time, but deep listening, deep empathy, as you said, having a voice and knowing when to lean in, being really brave.
Because I think some conversations are actually just monologues at each other, aren't they? So someone waits for a gap in the conversation so that they can say the thing that they know sounds clever. Maybe they've said it before to other clients and they just launch into it. But I don't think you get the alchemy, because you're not really basing it on something, that a spark that has come from the other person or the group. It's a pre-prepared speech that you're reeling out. So I agree. I don't know how you train for it either, but it's fun. That's the thing. I think it's genuinely more fun because it's unexpected, innovative. You don't know what somebody's going to like and not like. You're not trying to be perfect and have a perfect presentation that has got no problems within it. You're offering it up and you're going, here are some options. What grabs you?
I'm a big fan of an iterative process and a thought starter, because as you said, you're not going to come with all the answers. You're like, here's the answer to your cultural brief and here's your creative. It doesn't work like that. You need that iterative conversation to get to what I call the nuggets, the thing where you go, it's that.
Yeah.
And then you want to go deeper and you go wider and you go, but it's like, this is the tension that is so powerful for our brand because, and those are the kind of projects that I absolutely love. I think they can completely change the game. And as you said, be revolutionary to a brand, because so many categories you look at talk the same, operate the same, look the same. I mean, cars are my favorite. Car advertising, it all looks the same. There's some incredible vista, some beautiful mountain, a tricky windy road, and a car driving. It's all the same. And it's like, we're meant to be storytellers as brand owners. So what's your brand story if you're a car owner? Like, I couldn't tell you.
Yeah.
So getting to those deep tensions and unlocking them for your brand is so powerful. Do you have any favorite Ripple moments? Obviously, you can't share confidential gems of insights from your clients, but have there been moments or meetings or conversations where you're like, wow, like, this is something?
I think there might have been moments, but I actually think processes are actually. So, for example, we worked on a project which was all about understanding Gen Z and their approach to money. And it could have been quite dry, but it was a complex dive into some quite unique economic and financial constraints that they were rubbing up against and that were boxing them in. And it made us think about the fact that in our own trajectories and our own professional life, we'd been lucky enough, because of the era that we'd been born into, to have a social contract that paid off. So, for example, this thing of you work hard, that translates into a job. That job translates into some form of security. That security translates into some form of ownership. And that entire social contract seems to have broken down for young people these days. And it's a hugely emotional thing that you were actually talking about. And we were lucky enough to have a really great iterative process with our clients. They were dealing with a very specific question, but then, as you described on Diet Coke, the specific question becomes a deeper human question. And looking back to that, I see it as a really great example of what on the surface can seem quite a rational world. And as soon as you try and understand the deeper and darker realities behind that, and you're not scared of painting that in its very most brutal way, really, you're not sugarcoating, then you can really empathize. You mentioned before when you were talking about the original project we worked on, is that regardless of your age as a woman, you felt a deep empathy with what women were going through. That's what you really want to do, is not treat your customer as a code you want to crack, but you actually treat them as someone you deeply empathize with and want to help. Adam and I at Starling have started doing some pro bono projects, and the first pro bono project that we did was last year, and it was called The Rift, and it was about the cultural and ideological rift between young men and young women. And we could see that globally through voting patterns, that young men seem to be shifting rightward and young women seem to be shifting leftward. We wanted to understand deeper beneath the surface. We weren't quite sure if any brands wanted to understand this. In fact, when we brought it up, nobody seemed to be jumping on it as like, oh, that'd be an interesting brief, even though a lot of them are obsessed with Gen Z. But then this particular dynamic, which we were sort of saying, well, actually, you've got two very different cohorts within this one generation who have different values, different aspirations, different ideas of what a good life looks like. And the process of articulating that question, getting a bunch of collaborators on board who very generously donated their time and their ideas, putting a story together and launching that. You were there, so you saw what the story was all about. But then things happened, like, for example, Adolescence, the Netflix show that aired about a month afterwards, and suddenly to see something ignite and hit the cultural conversation in such a huge way, which it really did. And I think actually the reason why it did is hits on so many of the things you've already talked about, which is a sense that something's not all right, but not really understanding why. And also this very deep fear, which is, it is happening under my roof. So the home that I thought was the safe space that I was I thought it was dangerous out there. I didn't realize it was dangerous in here. To see some of the things that we had been deeply analyzing for the previous couple of years and hadn't seen much traction with suddenly become such a talking point in British culture felt very exciting, to be honest. It felt like finally, we need to lean into this and do something about it. And it was a ripple moment.
And again, that's an example of you guys being ahead. You'd already done the rift work. You're already talking about the differences in genders and the issues that were happening in society. And it takes a bigger media moment to then get everyone else to feel it. But it's another example again of getting people to feel the challenge, feel the tension, feel the issues of what's going on with young people in society and how extreme a situation that is, but it's reality of what's happening. You were there at the beginning, kind of telling those stories. And that's what's incredible about what you do is you listen to culture, you listen to what's happening, and you can preempt what is coming. And that's exactly what you did with the rift. And it was amazing to be there and hear the conversations and the challenge and the provocation. It was an amazing room to be part of and hear what's going on in the world and in society and how brands need to and should be responding to this. And I think brands are often quite nervous of leaning into culture. And I think some brands have been burnt by doing it in quite a steering into a blind spot that maybe they didn't have the credibility to do that. And I think some brands have been burnt quite publicly about leaning into culture. But I think it's always because they've not done it sympathetically, empathetically, in the right spaces, and arguably taken it too far. Have you seen examples of where brands are just nervous to go into those spaces? And why do you think that is?
I think part of it is that there's no one unifying way to be in culture for a brand. So just as a brand has its own brand positioning, just as a brand tries to differentiate itself from the category, there's also ways of being in culture. You hear a lot of phrases that are overused, like we need to move at the speed of culture, or we need to leverage this trend. We need to shape culture. And whilst totally understanding those instincts, there's no one particular archetype that a brand needs to adopt in order to be culturally relevant. Again, it's look within and then look without. And at that interplay of inside out, outside in, like who are we as a brand and what role would we like to play here? There is an intricacy to the way you interact with culture, which is entirely unique to your organization. And it might feel, as you say, brands are wary of it. They might feel that it's too monolithic and they have to do this. They have to be a Nike. That's definitely not the case. It's a process of understanding that interplay between brand and culture.
Yeah. And as a result, therefore, being really clear on who you are, your vision, your strategy, your plan, your values, and the spaces that you're willing to step into and own and have an opinion on. Sometimes brands want to play in culture, but they're not willing to have an opinion. And that, again, becomes very monolithic. It's brands that are brave enough to know who they are, own who they are, and then step bravely into conversations in a credible and authentic way that allows them to have conversations about what's going on in society and how brands can play a role. It's incredibly powerful when it's done well and when it's done thoughtfully and carefully.
Agreed. What you've described is not another way of thinking about it. That culture's there to be leapt upon or leveraged, or all of these words quite exploitative of culture, rather than the way that we used to think about nature, which it was this resource that we could use. Culture's not a resource to be used by brands.
Yeah.
What you described is much more of a humble way of thinking about culture exists without us. What's needed here and how can we help rather than own?
I agree. I also think there's an element of jumping on the bandwagon as well, because things happen culturally in society and it can be little moments like what's been happening over the last few weeks. And I see brands jump on these cultural moments. That it's not culture, but these moments in society, and the media goes crazy and it elevates a certain conversation or a certain moment or a certain misdemeanor. And brands jump on that because it's an opportunity to be humorous or funny or advantageous. And I think that is so disingenuous. And sometimes it's done in a way that just does not feel like that brand. And you see them jumping on it and you're like, oh, I'm not sure about that. That doesn't feel right. And you feel it as a consumer. I'm not quite sure how these things get through systems when, as a consumer, you're thinking, that doesn't feel right for that brand. It makes me feel a bit uncomfortable and not in a good way. The CEO misdemeanor at the Coldplay conference. Concert. Yeah. And some of the stuff I've seen, stuff from Lidl and like brands jumping on it. Oh no, gross. Why would you do that? So yeah, bizarre.
No, and also it'll be yesterday's news as well. That's the
totally, because it's more like these murmurs than these little blips. It makes me feel icky when brands jump on stuff like that. It just feels wrong. I want to talk to you about a big ripple moment in your life, and that's writing Flex.
Yes.
Can take us back to the beginning, because this came through one of your clients asking you a beautiful question, right?
Yeah. So at the time we were working for a publisher, helping them understand cultural shifts, and in order for them to think about what might people want to read about, what kind of stories are going to engage them. Really fascinating work. And we do quite a lot of work with publishers, and I really, really enjoy it. Because of the nature of what Starling does, which is we work across so many different categories, but also we are lucky enough to speak to so many intelligent, groundbreaking people from all these different worlds. And it gives us fizzy cross-fertilization. So there's always, you know, that thing of like having a load of tabs open on your computer. I often feel like that in my head, you know, of like all of these different, oh, that's a signal, that's that. There's something called a doorknob moment, apparently, in the world of GPs and doctors, which is you might come to the GP and talk about something. You got an ache or a worry. And then there's a doorknob moment, which is just as you have it on your hand on the doorknob when you're about to leave, there's one last question they ask, and actually, oh, it's that, and you answer it, and that's the thing. That is actually the key thing that we should be thinking about. And the same happened at one of these meetings, which was, if you were to write a book at the moment, what would you write about? My thought was, I had been in practice working flexibly at the time for 10 years, 15 years in various different iterations. So I worked part-time before I had my kids because I wanted to write as well. The kids were born. I came back in various different iterations, 2 days, 3 days, 4 days a week. And it had always been very big negotiation. Often it had been, and this rings true when I started to do the research of Flex, a sense of, okay, this can work for you, but don't talk about it more broadly because we can't have everyone working like this. It'll be a complete mess. We can't. So there's a sense of cards to your chest, almost a bit of shame around it. Yet, when you look at the tabs in my head that were open, it would be like massive technological revolution happening, in which there's plenty of ways we can work together efficiently and well. Another technological revolution happening, which is self-monitoring, being able to understand when I work best, when I've had a bad night's sleep, my energy's peaks and troughs. And it felt like people are going to think more creatively about how we work instead of just these monolithic blocks of like the commute, so expensive, so long, housing's unaffordable for people, emotional load at home, particularly carried by women, and how this uneven load of women managing so much at home, but yet also working full time. It just felt there was something that was broken and you could apply a new lens to it. And that's what I suddenly got really fired up to write about. And it was prior to the pandemic. So I came up with the idea in 2018 and felt like, because of all these signals, it felt like a really important thing to write about. I felt very personal about it because I felt like it could liberate a lot of people, not just mums, which was at the time, that was the kind of go-to thought. You thought mums and part-time, but actually anyone who felt marginalized from a quite macho presenteeism form of working culture. So people with neurodiversity, people with disabilities, people with caring responsibilities, elder parents, people who the commute was really expensive and unmanageable. And it felt like it could liberate, create an inclusive culture, involve a mind shift at work that would release a whole bunch of creativity as well. Because when you think creatively about your own patterns, your own schedules, you also unleash that creativity to think about work in general. So yes, that's where the idea came from. And I applied the murmuration thought, which was, yes, there was one chapter that was all about work, but then there was flexibility in the mind and how we can be more cognitively flexible, flexibility in the body, understand circadian rhythms, understand menstrual cycles for women. And so it felt like there were these different aspects, flexibility in the home, and trying to unpick the emotional load and how we can make it more equitable. And then the pandemic happened. Actually, it felt again like a bigger cultural conversation.
Yeah. And sadly, we're almost rewinding back to pre-pandemic, where there's this huge move to return to the office. Where's that coming from? Do we need that? Why is this happening again? Back to presenteeism.
Yeah, it's become a culture war. So much of modern discourse is become polarized and binary. And so you get a sense of flexible workers on one side and return to the office on the other. And in fact, there's a really fruitful space between, which is hybrid working. So on the one hand, it's become quite polarized. I think the other hand, there's a sense of things are complex right now, and they're complex for a number of reasons. We've gone through a hugely disruptive set of global circumstances, from war to economic disruption to Trump to pandemic to Trump again. So you're reacting to a whole load of circumstances. And human instinct is to say, we just need to return to when it was more stable. And by the way, when it was more stable was where everyone was here. I didn't have to think about anyone's schedules, and it worked well. It worked fine. So I think there is a desire for that stability and certainty, but you'd be totally throwing the baby out with bathwater, because these huge benefits of inclusivity and creativity, and interestingly, one of the main reasons that is being cited by leaders in saying they want people to return to the office is collaboration. We need to be face to face, because that's when the best collaboration happens. My second book is about collaboration, and I think the word collaboration has been weaponized
wow.
in this instance, because I mean, look what we're doing now. So I don't believe you can think in that binary way about collaboration happens here and this is for something else. The whole thing is a much more creative process, and that's hopefully what I want to break down in my next book.
Amazing. What's your next wave? So you've already mentioned second book coming. Is that the next wave for you?
Yeah, it is actually. And I think it's been coming in this quite organic way, in that I told you about the Rift and the Pro Bono project we did. That was a massive collaboration. We didn't really know how to do it. It was a total experiment. It's quite messy. Everyone was generous. We've learned from it, and now we're doing the Rift 2, and we will have more of a process in mind. But that was an unleashing of a latent desire that we're all living quite atomized lives, and it's wonderful to be able to cooperate on something that you all have a massive passion for. And in terms of why I think it's needed, is I think that we've all been wired for individualism and competition in the Western world, and the way that we've been educated is about achievements. You know, those are individual achievements, they're not group achievement. And so many of the problems that we're now dealing with are big, messy, complex problems that require many brains, many disciplines coming together to try and figure them out. So we kind of have to learn how to do it again. And I have to admit, I'm not a natural collaborator.
You're not, surely. You must be.
I don't know, Laura. I mean, it doesn't come as naturally to me as I wish it did. So I am learning as I go with this, and I'm learning techniques that will help me and hopefully will be useful to others. But yeah, I think that is the next wave of my
I think you're a great collaborator, because what great collaboration starts with is an open mind, an open dialogue, trust, discussion, sharing, and that starts great collaboration. And you've always done that, so I think you're a great collaborator.
All right, well, I won't tell you all my weaknesses.
Final question. We ask this question to everyone at the end of our Ripple Impact podcasts. What advice would you give to aspiring wave makers?
I would say trust your gut, and particularly for young people coming into the workplace, they might be faced with so much complex jargon and ways of doing things. You might feel like you can't speak the language of wherever you're at, and I completely acknowledge that. But you might have an instinct about something that doesn't necessarily fit into that corporate jargon or fit into that language or that existing stuff. And it requires some thought and for you to stress test it yourself. It's so easy for these ideas to be squashed by boring ways that things have always been the status quo. If you feel restless about something, if you feel instinctively that something is important, try and find the right words to bring that to the table, because organizations need to hear that stuff. And I just find it such a shame, because if you imagine all these great thoughts that are almost not on the table because people have self-censored because they think that doesn't quite fit with everything I'm hearing right now, because that's exactly how I felt at the beginning of my career. I just felt like there was so much structure and jargon associated with the work that we were doing. It didn't have a spaciousness in it for new ideas. It didn't feel elastic. It felt very, very rigid. And I just think you need to find, we talked about chinks of light at the beginning, but you need to find those little spaces. And if you feel strongly, there's a reason why you feel strongly. So trust your gut.
Yeah, trust your gut instincts and be the person that speaks out, because we need that cognitive diversity.
Yeah.
And that's what people are brought into organizations for, is their experience, their opinions. I think it's everyone's duty to share that. So it's having the bravery sometimes of saying, I see that differently, actually.
And also having the little scripts, just like how you put it. You're not saying, I disagree with you, blah, 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 blah. But as to say, actually, I see that differently. What about this perspective? And having those little scripts of finding the way in, which I think are the start of potentially something much bigger.
Well, Annie Auerbach, thank you so much for taking us deep into the ripple impact of culture, of gut instincts and trusting them and voicing them, and having the courage to challenge systems from invisible pressures and tensions in society and culture to turning them into contagious ideas. You remind us that change doesn't always come from shouting louder, it comes from deep listening and empathy. So thank you. It's been incredible as always. For our podcast listeners and our YouTube watchers, remember that ripples are often quiet, cultural, and deeply human. And when we spot them, they can transform how we see the world. Instinct is not fluffy, it is deep experience that you should trust and you should voice, because we need that cognitive diversity. So Annie, thank you so much. It's been amazing to talk to you as always. That is a wrap on this Ripple episode. Tune in weekly for more bold voices and inspiring wavemaker guests. I'm Laura Barber. This is the Ripple Impact. Thank you, Annie from Starling, so much. We will see you all next week. Thank you, Annie.
Thanks so much, Laura.
Lovely to see you. Take care, everyone. See you next week. Bye-bye.
Bye.